Coursework in GCSE History plays a huge part in determining your grade in the summer. And the difference between average coursework and top band coursework is how you structure it. Today, I'm going to take you through your introduction, your paragraph structure, your conclusion, and your source work. You're going to learn the main things to do to make sure you get that top band. Let's begin with the introduction. The first sentence of your coursework should be answering the question, because that's what the task is. We need to answer the question you've been asked. So before we go into anything specific, just make sure you've said explicitly at the beginning, what is your main argument? And this way, the examiner knows that you're focused and staying on the right track and answering the question you've actually been asked. After you cover your main argument, we now want to introduce our main themes for the essay. So you should know before you start writing, what are your key arguments and how are they grouped together? This may be done thematically, so you may have economic themes, political themes, and social or cultural themes. But this isn't the only way to do it. You may have a better way that suits you for grouping your arguments together. But in your introduction, you get the chance to tell the examiner how you're going to present all of this information. And if you can tell the examiner the key themes you're going to explore, he will know that you've actually spent time structuring and formatting your arguments. And then you're on the way to a top band mark. Towards the end of your introduction, you can talk about some points of significance that may come into your conclusion as well. So you may explain your main argument a little bit more by talking about the wider historical context. How does your argument lay out in the context of history at the time? Maybe there's some differences in impact in the short term and the long term of what you're studying. Or maybe what you're studying affected different people in society. Maybe there's one factor or theme that is much more important than the others. And then you finish by giving a link back to the main argument. So you summarize everything you've said and explain how this supports the argument you started with at the beginning of your introduction. And this forms the full grade 9 introduction you need in your coursework. So answer the question, outline your argument, give some broader analysis in the wider historical context, and then link back to the question at the end. Now let's look at structuring your paragraphs. As we said before, ideally, you can put all of your arguments into 3 or 4 clear themes. Like I said, this may be economic, political, social, but it could be other ways as well. It's entirely up to you, as long as it makes sense. Really, the point of this is just to make sure your arguments aren't all over the place. That you're not talking about finance in one part of the essay, and then also at the end with something else in the middle. You just want to make sure that all of the things you're talking about are directly next to each other in the essay. And this helps it to flow better. And then every paragraph you write needs to start by answering the question. Let's say you're doing an essay on the significance of something. So every paragraph in this case would start by saying, this event was significant because, and then you introduce the factor. So use the words in the question to do this and stay on track. Once you've done this, you can then go into your evidence. This should be the easier bit because you can use all of your sources without having to memorize them. But don't just put anything here. Make sure everything you're putting is the most useful bit of material to answer the question you've been asked. Everyone is going to have some great facts in their coursework. But what puts people in the top band is picking the most relevant material. So just use your common sense here. Is the quote you're using or the thing you're talking about actually helping you to support your argument for the piece of coursework? And be careful not to overspill and write too much for your evidence, because don't forget, you're not getting points for describing what happened. It's more about analysing the events. So give a couple of facts and stats just to set the scene, and then go straight into how this leads to your argument being stronger. And this is your explanation. And don't forget to have a linking sentence at the end that brings everything back to your broader argument. I'd also suggest in your writing style that you use simple language. Don't try and overcomplicate things, because this is when students tend to waffle. Just stick to what happened and linking what happened to your argument. You don't have to write really long and complicated sentences to get a good mark. Just keep it simple. We're doing GCSE History, not GCSE English. So don't worry about using loads of fancy or sophisticated language. By the way, before you hand in this coursework, you can actually get it marked beforehand and get a personalised feedback report with annotations from me within 3 days of submitting your coursework. This is the best way to make sure you're actually writing a top band essay before you give it to the examiner and it's too late. Just go to gcsehistorytutor.co.uk and use the essay marking and coursework service on there to submit your essay. You don't have to sign up, you just go straight on, submit your essay, and I'll send it back to you within 72 hours. Now let's talk about conclusions. Again, the first thing you have to do is answer the question. So go back to this broad argument you're making. What actually is your overall answer in 1 or 2 sentences to the title of the coursework? And then you can summarize your key arguments and how each key argument or theme supports your broader argument. And then for the top band mark in your conclusion, you need to think of some higher level perspectives on the topic. I'm going to give you some ideas here to help you with this. Firstly, short-term versus long-term. How did the significance of what you're studying change in the first few months, years, compared to decades later? Another perspective could be different impacts on different groups. This may be the impact on working class versus upper class, or different races, or different places in the country. But usually things impact people in different ways. So think about how this applies to your coursework. You could also discuss how the views towards this event have changed over time. Do people view it differently now compared to when it happened? Another good idea is to think about whether it was unique compared to other historical times. Has something similar happened before, and were the reactions the same? Or is this event completely unique to the wider historical context? One final one, how symbolic was it in the long term? And how is it remembered today? Make sure at the end of your conclusion, after you've done these higher level perspectives, that you come back to the broader argument to finish, so you're staying on track with answering the question. And lastly, some quick comments on the sources you're using. Like I said before, the most important thing is to pick the most relevant and useful sources that support your argument. It's not only to make your argument stronger, but you actually get marked on how relevant and useful this material you've used is. So this impacts your work in 2 different ways. Also, don't rely on the same source too often. If you're unsure if you're doing this, then list out all of your sources on a piece of paper and see if one sticks out more than the others. If there is one that's being used more than others, try and cut down the amount of times you're using it by half and replace it with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 other sources. And of course, formatting. This will vary depending on what syllabus you're doing at school, so check with your teacher on how you should be formatting your sources when you type them out. I hope you found these tips helpful for structuring your GCSE coursework, and don't forget you can submit your coursework to me for feedback and marking before you give it to the examiner by visiting gcsehistorytutor.co.uk and going to the essay marking and coursework marking service. Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'll see you all in the next video.